It's the middle of the night in China, and at this hour, untold thousands are fighting for their lives in the wake of a terrible earthquake. Some are buried under the rubble of their homes, offices and schools. Others are in hospital recovering from their wounds. Now, the latest death toll from this disaster is now more than 8,000. Al-Jazeera's Melissa Chan has now arrived in the heart of the earthquake zone in the Sichuan province. She joins us now on the phone. Melissa, I know that there's no electricity there and it's obviously very dark. Can you give us a sense of what's happening there and what you're seeing?
Well, we're headed towards this one city that has at least 5 schools collapsed. Now, you have to keep in mind that when this earthquake took place, it was during the school hours, so there are a lot of children unaccounted for. Along the highway that we've been driving along have been ambulance trucks by the dozens at this point, and as well as military vehicles carrying People's Liberation Army soldiers as part of the rescue effort. We've also seen big construction vehicles driving along this highway. Presumably they will be used to deal with the collapsed buildings and all the rubble there to try to get to people that are trapped underneath. So definitely a lot of activity, even though it is in the middle of the night here.
Now, as we're talking to you, Melissa, we're looking at some of the latest pictures coming from that area of the rescue attempts in that area. That's one of the problems, isn't it? Getting rescue teams to those areas that have been cut off.
Absolutely. We have reports that at least one major road heading to the epicenter of the earthquake is blocked due to land. In terms of the blocking of the mountain, there's some dirt along the road and rubble along the highway, so they haven't been able to access the epicenter along that major route. So there's very little information coming out from Wenchang, which is the epicenter of the city of a population of 200,000 or 300,000 people, and that is a big problem right now. We are getting information about the surrounding areas, more reports of collapsed buildings, more reports of injuries, more reports of deaths. As you say, there's several thousand deaths, and this is the middle of the night here. I think by the morning time, you'll be getting a lot more figures in terms of just the extent of the damage of the earthquake.
Now, I know a lot of the victims were saying they're very worried about aftershocks. What else is concerning them at the moment?
Well, aftershocks, definitely. A lot of people along the streets here we see have been spending the night outside. They're afraid to sleep at home. And a lot of other things have been affected in this area. For example, with gas. There is a rationing of gas. It is more difficult to find gas stations that are selling gas right now. By local official order, they've been ordered not to sell gas, I think, to ration it for the military and for the rescue efforts in this area.
Now, something like 80% of the buildings have been affected, have fallen down to the ground. What is it that those victims there need the most at the moment?
Well, obviously the very basics, and again, I think it's a question of logistics, of getting the basics to them, food and water, and also helping those who have injured. We have the premier, Wen Jiabao, in this province very quickly after the earthquake, and the president pledging to send as many rescue workers as possible to this region. But again, a lot of the problems is access. This is a very big province. Sichuan province is one of the most populated provinces. So you're looking at people having to go through the cities and through the rural areas and try to make sense of all this mess.
Melissa, very briefly, can you give us a sense of the feeling there? I mean, are people in a state of shock? It can seem, I'm sure, not real.
It's a very powerful earthquake. It was felt very far away, even along the eastern coast of China. So definitely a lot of fear. They haven't felt anything like this in a very long time in this area. And people just aren't generally earthquake educated in this area.
Okay, Melissa Chan with that live update on the phone. Thank you very much. So for more on the day's events in China and how this disaster has been unfolding so far, here's Alan Fisher.
车站方面介绍， Too scared to go back indoors, thousands will spend the night in the open across central China. Tents have been thrown up as temporary shelter. Food and water is being handed out, but many are just making themselves comfortable where they can. Whole towns have been thrown into darkness, making the devastation even more sinister. People ran for their lives when the first tremors hit. These students were the lucky ones. It's becoming clear several school buildings in Sichuan province have collapsed. Chinese news agencies say hundreds have been buried in the rubble.
I was so scared. The room I was staying in was shaking like this.
Hospitals moved their patients into the open air no matter how ill. For those less able, there was help to get to safety. China's Prime Minister headed quickly to the quake epicentre. He described it as a major disaster with thousands feared dead.
Facing disaster, the most important thing is calm, confidence, courage and strong leadership.
The extent of the damage is becoming clear with each passing hour, and the number of dead is growing too. Specialist rescue teams are making their way to the disaster area, but the extent of the destruction will make it difficult to get to those most in need.
The infrastructure is going to be greatly degraded because of the earthquake, and one can't stress the enormity of this kind of earthquake, magnitude 7.8, which is by any standards a very great earthquake, and it would tax even the most developed country to have infrastructure which could support this kind of disaster.
Even in Beijing, 1,500 kilometres from the epicentre, the force of the quake could be felt.
So we were on the 15th floor, and about 10 minutes ago the building started shaking quite a lot, so we just left.
The epicentre is believed to be 90 kilometres northwest of Jiangdu in Sichuan province. There has been a speedy response by the Chinese authorities, but the true scale of this disaster is by no means clear. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Joining me now on the phone is Dr. John Wally, a geologist at the University of Portsmouth. Dr. Wally, this seems to have caught everybody by surprise. Any warnings?
Nothing specific, but it is an area where earthquakes can be expected on infrequent but regular occurrence.
And to this scale?
Yes, there is historical records that have earthquakes of at least this intensity in the past, but we're talking 50, 60 years since the last one.
Now, a lot of the victims are very concerned about any further aftershocks. Is this something that they should be worried about?
Well, they certainly are going to experience aftershocks. Most of them will be pretty minor and merely a source of concern. You can imagine that people in this situation, any new tremors are going to arouse very, very strong feelings. But I gather that there's been an aftershock as strong as magnitude 6 today, but that's about the maximum that you'd expect. But these can continue for quite some time now, and probably weeks or even months. But they will decay fairly rapidly.
Can you give us some sort of indication what would have set this off, the chain of events?
Well, yes, the chain of events really goes back a very, very long time into the geological past, when India was in collision with the southern margin of the then Asian continent. And what has happened is that since then, that's over 45 million years ago, India has still been moving northwards. That's why we have the Himalayas, that's why we have the Tibetan Plateau. And it's that Tibetan Plateau that nowadays is squeezing eastwards and squeezing underneath the softer rocks that are in this region of China. And it's the faults that are allowing that to happen that locate these earthquakes.
Right, it's a long time coming. Dr. John Wally, thank you very much. Right, to the aftermath of Cyclone Nargis now in Myanmar. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon says he's immensely frustrated at the unacceptably slow delivery of aid to Myanmar. He's laying the blame squarely on the country's military rulers. On Tuesday, the first US flight arrived in the country, bringing some relief. Washington promises 2 more planes are on their way. It'll be too little, too late for many. The official death toll is at nearly 32,000 people. But the UN is now backing American estimates that as many as 100,000 people perished in that. Right, let's go to John Terrett now, our correspondent who was listening in on that press conference. Now, Ban Ki-moon didn't speak too long. Does that say anything about how the UN is feeling about this issue?
Well, I think it might, Jane. I mean, this was a diplomatic initiative of the highest caliber. You saw Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, flanked by his senior press advisor and also his humanitarian chief, John Ho.